Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, yWhales, wherever in the world you are today. This is like one of the best timing we've ever had, best or worst, depends on how you want to say it, for an interview. And the reason why is currently we are literally hours after the implosion or continued implosion of FTX. FTX was the primary investor, and Sam Bankman was the founder of Alameda Labs, which had a very significant part in the building of a very important chain in the Web3 ecosystem called Solana. Today, I'm sitting here with Kuleen from the Solana Foundation, and I think we're going to have a really good conversation about kind of not just technically how everything is going with the Solana chain, but also with some of the macros and how that affects a Web3 team that's highly focused on being the bleeding edge of the future of Web3 and blockchain technology, and really how all this fits into play. So, Kuleen, I'm so thankful for you taking the time today. I'm sure the last 72 hours have been a little bit of a challenge. I see how exhausted your dog is in the background, and I'm sure your entire team is feeling it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's definitely been a whirlwind of a week, and the week's not over yet. So knock on wood that nothing else, we don't get any further really exciting developments. But excited to be here. It was actually interesting. Like this morning, I was thinking about, should I even do this podcast? Like we have a lot of things that we're trying to do to make sure that the ecosystem's okay. But I think it's also important to make sure that like, all is far from over. Like we will get through this. And so you want to make sure like to do as much that is business as usual as possible.
100%.
And yeah.
Yeah, and this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I can say that Solana is no stranger to FUD or manufactured news and a variety of other things. But let's go ahead and jump back real quick, and then we'll dive right into the interview. Because let's start with kind of you, so that everyone understands where you sit in the foundation and how you got to the foundation. Most importantly.
Yeah, sure thing. So I've been at the foundation now. Technically, I was first at Solana Labs and then the foundation, but for the sake of this call, we'll simplify things. So I've been at the foundation now, or part of the Solana team, for about 2 years, on the business side of things. So my mission is really to grow the ecosystem of applications that's being built on Solana and get some really amazing Web3 apps built on Solana that will bring value to a ton of people. I've been really focused on games in particular over the last 12 to 18 months. So basically primarily working with game studios of all shapes and sizes that are building Web3 games, and working with those that are building their games on Solana. So that's, in a nutshell, what I've been up to here. Before this, I sort of started my career in management consulting, as many people coming out of college who don't know what to do with their lives or want to do. And then, as with most people in consulting, also realized that it was not the career that I saw myself in long term. I worked at Two Sigma Investments for about 3 years after that. So Two Sigma Investments is basically a really large quantitative trading firm. That was an awesome experience. I was on the Corp Dev team there, sort of tried unsuccessfully to get them to trade crypto in like 2016. But anyways, and after that, I actually had a very brief stint at DoorDash during the pandemic leading up to its IPO, which was a wholly different, crazy experience. But now I am where I belong. And so quite a journey it's been.
That's amazing. So what drew you to blockchain? Because you've got a little bit of TradFi, you've got a little bit of startup, chaos disruption experience. What was so exciting about a blockchain startup?
Yeah. So my journey into crypto, there were two, call it, main light bulb moments for me. The first was in something like 2015. I was writing by, his name's Ryan Selkis. He's the founder of Masari. Masari, people think of as like the Bloomberg of crypto, for those of you who are not familiar with it. So Ryan was writing, sort of blogging at the time on Medium or whatever, and he was making the argument that, hey, Bitcoin is useful because it's a non-governmental store of value. It's a currency that's sort of independent of any sovereign control. And as I thought about it, I thought, hey, this is just useful. It didn't necessarily seem to me that Bitcoin would be, whatever, ever worth $60,000 or anything like that. But sort of fundamentally, I was like, okay, currency has historically been controlled by governments. That sort of has some advantages and disadvantages associated with it. At the very least, having a non-sovereign currency seems like a really interesting experiment, and I can see the argument for it. So that was light bulb moment number one. And then light bulb moment number two actually took like another 3 years because basically it was using DeFi on Ethereum for the first time. So the first time I used ETHLend and Uniswap, and because up till then, sort of seeing the Ethereum launch in 2017, all the ICO craze, none of it really resonated with me. It was like, okay, this is interesting, but this just feels like worse than using centralized services. Why should I use this? And so it was really using the early DeFi protocols where I was like, okay, I actually see the power of this. And then what led me to Solana was that as I was using these DeFi protocols on ETH, I was like, there's no way that I think this is the future as it stands. It was even back then like too expensive to use and it was too slow. Like especially having worked at a quantitative trading firm, like I know what finance can look like at its sort of most tech savvy epitome. And so like I was like, okay, where can DeFi actually get built? And so looking around, that's actually how Solana got on my radar. I remember watching some podcasts with Anatoly in the early days, and I was like, A, this guy's brilliant, and B, he just seems like a great guy. I would work for him. And so I was able to get connected to him, and that's sort of my journey into crypto and then Solana specifically.
I love that. So let's dive right into, kind of the big news that's going on today. And this podcast will most likely get, released publicly in the next 24 hours. So the news will not change too much, hopefully, as you said. And let's just go ahead and preface right off the bat that I'm going to say for myself, these are my views, my opinions that I will express throughout this entire podcast. And then Kuleen, what disclosures would you like to have right off the bat before we get into this convo?
Yeah, so very similar disclosure. This is definitely my personal view. I'm not speaking on behalf of the Solana Foundation, certainly not the Solana community, which is massive and has many opinions. So this is just me. The other thing is that I have literally no knowledge past what is on Twitter. So I am doom scrolling like the rest of you. That's where I'm getting my information. So unfortunately, for much alpha on this situation, you're not going to find it from me.
Well, good. Let's really make sure that we all have a good understanding of exactly what the stage is and what is at risk and what's at stake. Can you give us a little bit of history of the Solana Labs / Foundation's involvement or history with Sam Bankman, FTX, and Alameda, so we can understand and have a stage set for what occurred?
Yeah, sure. So my understanding of the history, I wasn't around for all of this, so some of this is like, me sort of hearing from others. But uh, back in this was 2019, I think Sam wanted to build, or the FTX team, or Alameda, I guess it was probably mostly Alameda at the time, wanted to build an on-chain order, central limit order book exchange. They saw how these AMMs like Uniswap work, and they were like, okay, this is interesting, but because most of them have like quantitative trading backgrounds as well, they're like, real finance generally works on limit order books that gives you a lot of flexibility. We want to build that on chain. And so then they canvassed a lot of the blockchain options at the time to figure out, hey, where can we actually build this? And Solana was the thing that actually let them build a limit order book. And so that's when the Serum team decided to build it on Solana. And I think that's really how the relationship got kickstarted, is they tested the tech and they were like, holy shit, this Solana can actually do what we want to do, which no one else can. So my understanding, that's sort of the kickoff the relationship. After that, Alameda was an investor in the Solana raise. This was 2.5 years ago, roughly. And aside from that, I guess I'd characterize them as like they were certainly bullish on the ecosystem, and so FTX Ventures has invested in a number of projects that are being built on Solana, right? Totally independent of us. They're also invested in projects that are on other chains. And so, I think the important thing to call out here is that there's this meme in crypto land that Solana is a Sam coin. And the reality is that we are, independent organizations trying to do our own thing. He was trying to run an exchange business and Alameda trading. We were trying to grow an ecosystem on Solana. We are trying to grow an ecosystem on Solana. So totally separate things. The main connection point, if you will, was that Alameda Trading, I guess owned a bunch of Sol and was invested in some projects on Solana. But this notion that like Solana is a Sam coin, I think it was very much a meme and not representative of reality.
And I think that's the point that I wanted to hit at, and it was clarity for myself as well, because when you hear, and let's be at this point for anyone that's been, hanging out for the last 6 months, this is FTX is not the first meltdown we've seen. Alameda is not the first VC mega investor that's melted down. We've seen Three Arrows Capital, we've seen Terra Luna, we've seen entire we have seen a lot of technology that has stood up. We've seen a lot of technology that's failed, and making sure that we understand and point to the correct source of issues, whether it's kind of a bad decision that someone made, or it's a technical issue that someone made, and this is quite simply what I'm hearing from you is Solana's. I mean, you guys are the staff and you have no idea because it doesn't, they're just an investor. They were just there and they run some dApps on your chain, and they were great to invest in you guys early on. But they don't own like 50% of your coins. There's no like major, even if they sold everything, it's still a minor shareholder.
Yeah, well, this is crypto, so to be technical, even owning the token doesn't make you a shareholder because there's not like
Correct.
a company, right? So it's a protocol. They're substantial holders certainly, but nowhere near 50%. And yeah, I mean, the FTX and the Omni team, they weren't even dApp operators. They were VC investors in some of the dApps that are on Solana. So yeah, that's the nature of the relation, or like the relationship, if you want to call it that. Certainly, I have like personally friends at FTX and Alameda, but that's not particularly relevant for the ecosystem, right?
So I think let me ask the question, again in a slightly different way. The fact that FTX and Alameda essentially are disappearing, does that affect any of your day-to-day operations or the stability of your chain in any way, shape, or form?
From a technical perspective, nope. Yeah, I mean, the chain is a piece of code. It's an open source piece of code. A bunch of machines on the planet are running it. This has no direct impact on that. The only impact vector, if you will, is to the degree that whatever is going on at FTX or in Alameda, people perceive as having an impact on the price of the token, and then the price of the token changes. That has an impact on the chain, primarily, I think, through Solana DeFi. So, certain Solana DeFi protocols use SOL as collateral. If SOL's price falls, then that collateral is less valuable. Then DeFi protocols have to liquidate, right? But that's like
collateral damage.
That's collateral. I mean, collateral damage is sort of a punny way to put it. But my point is like, if there was another reason that caused SOL's price to fall, all these things would also happen, right? So it's sort of like related, but far from directly.
No, I think that's really good clarity. And again, the same thing would happen if Vitalik made a really bad move and had to liquidate his holdings of SOL or anything. In fact, it'd be worse for ETH if that's the case. In that case, because Sam did not invent Solana, he was just an investor in. So when you're kind of so let's pivot the conversation a little bit to kind of where things stand today. I mean, there is a number of liquidations that have happened, DeFi protocols and staking and a variety of things that have occurred. But to me, I think there's been about 50 million tokens is what I've seen. Between 30 and 50 million is what I saw was coming unstaked. I think it came early last night or late last night or early this morning. To me, I think that this is actually it behooves Solana, the chain, because the number one FUD that I constantly hear about the chain is it's too much VCs. There's too much VC, money invested early on, which I don't, I don't agree with. I think VCs, that's what they do. They make sure that you can build a product. But I think that if you have one of the major shareholders, now suddenly tokens coming into the market of which anyone can buy at a very reasonable price. By the way, I think today we're at $17, $18. That should disseminate a lot of that use case or a lot of that FUD talk about too much in some single wallets.
Yeah, so there's a couple things here. One on the specific point about the amount of SOL that came unstaked or was being unstaked. I forget the exact timing of this. That is mostly a result of poor circumstance. So there's actually public information on this now, which we can, I don't know if there's like show notes or anything. I'm happy to share links on this. But last week, there was a situation where Hetzner, which is basically a large data center operator, was kicking off Solana validators. And so the Solana Foundation, which delegates some SOL to a number of validators, was basically unstaking something of the order of like 28, close to 30 million SOL in order to shift it to validators that are not on Hetzner. It so happened that the timing of this coincided with like this FTX situation. So my understanding is that half of the SOL that people are talking about that's getting unstaked is completely unrelated to the FTX situation. It's just a function of poor timing. So the sort of severity of this quote unquote SOL unstaking thing is like vastly overblown from the perspective of how much SOL, or at least why it's being unstaked. The second point I want to make is in terms of concentration of ownership. Yeah, I think in general, it's healthier to have diffuse ownership of a token. And so if the result of this FTX situation is that SOL ownership is more diffuse because one of the large holders, Alameda, I don't know how this all plays out, right? So this is just entirely speculation. If their SOL ends up being held in other hands, it's good in the sense that like, yes, so now there's more diffuse ownership. So yeah, Solana being a VC chain, I mean, kind of to your point, VCs are there to back people in the early days and help them get going. So I always like laughed a little bit at that. The other thing was that like the SOL token was available for purchase, very early on, and so like in theory it was accessible to anyone. Anyways, I don't really like talking about SOL's price. I certainly have no view on it, etc. But
Yeah.
it is funny how some of these names stick.
Yeah, and again, the purpose of this is let's just address the FUD and the things that we're seeing on Twitter as well and in our community. And I think those are the perfect answers. Is some of this is DeFi, this is blockchain. If you like the protocol, buy it. If you don't. That's the great thing is we have so much of a choice. Let's pivot the conversation a little bit and talk technically about the chain, because there's a lot of things you guys are doing that are very new and innovative. What are kind of the main, whether they're KPIs or whether they're just kind of metrics that you guys follow? How would you kind of define the Solana chain in terms of metrics?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is a answer that could get very long, so you definitely cut me off. I think there's a few buckets I would think about when it comes to the types of things that are valuable to track, not just for Solana but for any chain. I think one is metrics that indicate performance and throughput, right? So everyone wants to have a high performance blockchain, L1, L2, whatever, but provably, can you demonstrate that this blockchain L2 or whatever is actually performant? So there's some metrics I think that talk about performance. And there's a second bucket of metrics, which is, okay, great, you have a performant chain, is there actually any activity on it? Are there users? Are those users actually engaging in economic activity on the chain? So I think there's a second bucket of activity. And then I think there's a third bucket that's relevant, which is I'll call security and decentralization. If you're running a blockchain, that should probably be important, because otherwise you should just use a centralized service. It's just faster and cheaper and inherently will be. And so I think there are metrics that can quantify how meaningfully decentralized is a given platform. So those are probably the three buckets of metrics that come to mind if we want to get into specific metrics for each one. So on the first one of performance, there's some simple stuff. You can just look at actually how many transactions is a blockchain transacting in per second or per day or whatever. Right? That's just a number that you can pull for all the live blockchains today. On that one, Solana, it's like kind of crazy actually. There's a good website, it's called Goku Stats, which tracks a bunch of these stats for a bunch of different chains. And if you look, like Solana basically does meaningfully more transactions than basically every other live chain, L1, L2 combined.
Oh yeah.
So it's not even close. So, and there's a point that people like to make, which is, like Solana counts votes as transactions, which is true, but for the purposes of what I'm saying, this is excluding votes as
Okay.
voting transactions, so real transactions. So that's one way to measure it. There's another way to measure performance, which is time to finality. When the sort of layman's way to think about it is when I hit the button to send a transaction, how quickly does that actually turn into a real transaction? This sort of varies, but Solana is basically the fastest on the metric as well. And Solana doesn't really reorg because of the way it's designed, so you don't have situations where you thought the transaction got confirmed but it wasn't. So those are a few. I mean, there's like other metrics you can look at, which is like benchmark numbers of like, in theory, how many transactions could a blockchain handle. I think benchmark numbers are generally not worth paying too much attention to because you can sort of sandbox anything.
So let me jump in a quick thing. One of the reasons that I have paid a lot of attention to Solana over the last couple of years has been your goal of TPS, just transactions per second, just very fast, very cheap. You guys are here to do business. You're here to do lots of business, and you want to make sure that it scales appropriately. And I think that the whether it's changed, but the last time I looked, I think 400,000 transactions per second was your goal, maybe like earlier this year or late last year. When we think about 400,000 transactions per second, Bitcoin runs at like 12, Ethereum, even on proof of work is what, 50
I think
ish.
it's less. I think
Yeah, it's not fast, which is why it's so expensive. So, at any point in time, you can go on something like SolanaBeach.io and you can see the transactions per second. What seems to happen a lot is you get a lot of use on your chain. Not only do you get a lot of use, you get a lot of bots, and bots aren't bad in every instance of that case, because sometimes bots are proving very useful. But there's points in time where you guys have transactions or TPS of over 300 to 400,000, sustained for a couple minutes before things start to kind of fall apart. What's kind of going on the backside when that stuff starts happening?
Yeah, it's a little bit hard to answer this question in general because it depends a lot on the types of transactions and whatnot. But I can give a little bit of an
How
overview.
about when
And
Star Atlas launched? That was like the first time the changes weren't like, holy crap. And it was a big launch, and it required a reboot to fix a few things. And but if you can talk about that experience, that'd be great.
yeah, I mean, so much happens in crypto. It's actually hard for me to like remember specific dates that are this long ago. Um, so I guess I can describe things generally. So in the outages that Solana has had, the each of them have had different reasons because what happens is like it'll happen and then the team will actually implement fixes for that specific problem. Um, in the case of an outage, so each of them had sort of slightly different problems or root causes. What ends up happening is, roughly speaking, the validators look at sort of the historical chain data and figure out, okay, what's the last block that all of us sort of are confident in? And then they restart the network from that last block. What's interesting is that this whole process actually generally takes place in the public. A lot of this chatter between the validators happens in the Solana Discord. So when there have been outages, I actually don't have any privilege insight into anything. I'm on the Discord channel, like literally anyone else who's interested in the topic, and they can see the validators coordinate, restart, and then sort of what happens after the restart is, okay, great, transactions start from that last confirmed block. And then usually, the Solana core engineering team is working on, if they haven't already, implemented patches for that specific issue. And so what's been interesting is that, yes, there have been brief outages, but each time, like, it gets marginally better. And what's been really interesting to see in the last week is that this has been a crazy black swan event, and a lot, Sol's token price cratered. This had ramifications for a lot of DeFi protocols on Solana. But notably, despite a huge surge in activity on chain, the network sort of held up really well. So to me, that's sort of a good representation of how things just get better over time. There's very much this like test and prod type of mentality that we have, which sometimes leads to some public failures, but ultimately leads to like moments like this where the network held up in a ridiculous environment, which is just awesome.
What does your team define as kind of success? How do you guys think of like this is what is needed and this is where we're going?
Yeah, so this is a pretty philosophical question. Um, I think there's a few elements to it. I think success for us is long term that a significant portion of the world has self custody as an option that they understand and are comfortable with and can engage with meaningfully. Um, and when I say, I'm talking like at least a billion people, um, which is very far from where we are today. So we have a long way to go. So that's one component of it. And then once people are comfortable with self custody, like we want Solana to be the place that they engage with sovereignly because we think that it's the best platform to do so. And so what we're trying to do is build for that future. I think what that future takes is super, super performant blockchain. It also takes really, really amazing applications that are built on Web3 that people actually want to use that bring value to their lives, whether that value is financial value, whether it's entertainment value, something else, right? So that's sort of the future philosophy that we're trying to achieve. People with self-custody, and those people with self-custody getting to sort of get meaningful value in their lives because of the application that they're using on Solana.
That's fabulous. So, a couple other questions I haven't, but let me go ahead and give a little bit of framing. So I've got a 15-year-old, and he is very much into crypto, blockchain, and kind of Web3 gaming, and him and his friends have just gravitated towards Solana. Because it just seems like it's to them it's faster. They can do more with it, and they credit. I credit a lot the Phantom wallet is being just so UI friendly and so mobile friendly that all of his friends that's what they use to interact and with your chain, and it works very, very well. How closely of a relationship do you have with the devs that are building on your chain like that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So Phantom, certainly, I think it's very instrumental, especially in the early days, to getting Solana sort of off the ground, if you will, because their UX was just step function better. And so, yeah, big fan of the team. In terms of sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was the actual question?
So the actual question is, how closely do you
Mm,
guys reach out to teams and say, hey, we love what you're doing, but let us help you take it and have just that much more of an integration.
yeah.
And the reason, go for it from there.
So for us, like our whole mission of the foundation is to empower these builders. So we really want to help everyone who is, really credibly trying to build something great in Web3 on Solana. Whether you're a Phantom or you're just like one dev who's trying to build some sort of novel application, the reality is like the foundation is a very small team. So we are something like 50 people, right? Which is not that big, especially given the size of the ecosystem now and the number of people and organizations who are building on it. But I mean, this is sort of the thing that we live and breathe. I spend my like Saturday and Sunday mornings like responding to people on Telegram, Twitter, DMs, whatever, right? Like this is why we're here, is to support the ecosystem. Um, and so one of the things that we try to do, at least I certainly try to do, is uh, we don't take a very strong editorial view. So it's not like, hey, we think you should build X on Solana. It's very much people come to us saying, hey, we have this like strong belief in building X. And we're like, hey, that's awesome. How can we help? Right? Because ultimately, like people, you'll never be able to substitute people's passions for building what they want to do. And so like, we don't want to get in the way of that. We just want to be enablers. So that's like a little bit of the mindset we have. And then when it comes to actually helping people, we want to help whether it's technical questions. I, for example, working with game studios, spend a lot of my time reading game white papers, because that's a thing now. If you're building Web3 games, you write white papers about how the token's going to work, what the gameplay mechanics are, all this stuff. I've read a ton of white papers, give commentary and feedback. I can't claim to be a tokenomics expert because I don't think that's a thing yet. There needs to be at least one game in crypto that really demonstrates it has a super sustainable sort of great token model to copy. But I've seen a lot of things at least not work, so I can have some pattern recognition there. Anyways, my point is like we try to be helpful. One of the things I strive to do is if we get the same question from say game studios or other teams building, whether it's wallets or marketplace or something, if we get the same question 3+ times, it's time to standardize a resource for that question. So if everyone's asking us, hey, how do I do wallet, like how do I use wallet adapter? It's like, okay, maybe we should have a piece of documentation that answers that question, right? So it's about figuring out what the questions are and then scalably answering them.
That's
And trying to do this in a way that's like democratic and open, right? It's not about like, oh, we have this like really special relationship with Phantom and not other people. No,
Yeah,
it's
but
like,
let me dive into to this question here, and I think this is an important one. Number one, you guys are a young project, and until you get to kind of a decade, I mean, really, Bitcoin just survived its first decade of existence, and has really showcased the technology of which has had very little upgrades over the years, and has proven true decentralization, true like there's no team that runs it, there's a new kind of group that is talking about it, or a bunch of miners that work on it, but to pivot back to Solana, like right now, we have this amazing foundation and labs that are helping people understand it, while you guys are kind of driving the innovation. At what point is that no longer needed? At what point do you guys get to the point where if the change just exists and it truly is a full decentralized team? Clearly, I'm not saying I want the foundation to go away, but at what point could it stand on its own?
yeah, it's funny. We want the foundation to go away. That's actually like a goal of ours, is that ultimately the foundation shouldn't need to exist forever. I don't think the foundation is going away anytime soon. I think there's a lot of work for us that we can do to benefit the ecosystem, but we certainly are like, that's the future that we're working towards, is really having this thing be fully decentralized. And I guess there's a couple sort of sub points I make to that, which is, you made the comment that we drive a lot of the innovation. Actually, I don't really think that's true. Certainly, that's not true for applications that are being built on top of Solana. That innovation is just coming organically from the ecosystem. The innovation, you could argue, was coming from core engineering, for example, was innovation on the protocol itself. But even that's actually, we're not like, core engineering is no longer the sort of only source of innovation. What's been interesting is like there's a few examples. So one is there's a team called Jito. Jito's building basically MEV on Solana, and so they have actually proposed, I believe successfully proposed, changes to the core protocol as part of their work. So that's just an outside team that is contributing. And then more notably, or not more notably, but more recently, Jump Trading is building a whole independent Solana client called Firedancer, which they unveiled, or at least showcased at the Breakpoint conference a couple days ago. And there's a lot that's really cool about the Firedancer client. One of them being that it's potentially going to be, or it's looking to be, a lot more performant. So they did a demo in their showcase at Breakpoint where the thing was doing like 600,000 transactions a second or so. Like, again, this is sandbox environment stuff, but like, because Jump gets to build this from scratch and in some ways doesn't have sort of the tech debt, if you will, of sort of the original implementation of the Solana client, they are getting to make optimizations that are just incredible. So super excited about that. But more importantly, I think it showcases that there's a bunch of stuff already happening that is other people, other organizations contributing to core protocol stuff.
Good.
So we're actively working to that future of having the foundation really not need to exist, and we're sort of actually making meaningful steps already.
I love hearing that. Let's dive into a little bit of technical things. And again, the point of the conversation today is really a lot of clarity. I think, we see a lot of things and we read a lot of things. So we appreciate you coming on here. Talk to us about the reboots. Talk to us about why they happen, how they happen, and what is the roadmap for that kind of dev cycle that it's going through right now?
Yeah, so the reboots, at least the last one or two, I think we're primarily around botting activity for NFTs. So bots trying to snipe specific NFTs and basically spamming the hell out of the network in order to try to win, whether it's like certain mints or whatever. And what ends up happening, and I'm sort of going to get out of my own technical depth, but there's actually a great resource for this for people who are really interested. the Solana Foundation publishes basically what's the right term what I'm looking for? Like retrospectives for
Mm.
each of the reboots, and so you can read in pretty great depth, like, okay, what happened, what were the steps taken, and what are like the fixes that either got implemented or are being implemented. And so that was sort of the roughly speaking the cause. Um, in terms of what's being done about it, in the short term, what gets done about it is the reboots, and I talked about the reboot process a little bit earlier. Um, in the long term, basically, there's a few different ways, mechanisms that can get designed to, or some of them have already been launched, and then some of them are sort of being worked out now. Um, there's actually a great page on the Solana website that covers these for people who are interested. It's called solana.com/upgrade.
Okay.
And so you can go there. It breaks out like 3 or 4 of these upgrades, and some of them are actually already live, and I think they're sort of marked accordingly. Um, but one example of a useful upgrade that, and this one is still sort of partially implemented, but being worked on, is fee markets. So the rough way to understand this is that, if you think about it, like Ethereum, for example, when there's one application that ends up generating a lot of activity, that causes fees to increase for everyone on Ethereum. Bored Apes doing a mint, like you're trying to swap something on Uniswap, you pay because something else is congesting the network. So on Solana, the beauty of it, right? So one of the fundamental design decisions was we wanted to have Solana be parallelizable, or Anatoly was like, hey, a lot of computation today is faster because we do things in parallel, not strictly serially, which is how Ethereum or EVM in general processes things, which is why I think EVM sort of fundamentally is slower.
Yep.
But parallel transactions. So one of the things this enables is that you can set fee markets on Solana by account or by program, so that if there's a really hot NFT mint, or there's like a specific DeFi market that is getting a lot of activity for whatever reason, fees can go up in that specific for that specific program, for that specific mint, without impacting the whole chain. So you have these like localized fee markets. And so there, if it's like, excuse me, like a dry throat, market
Yep.
makers competing to get into a very, hotly contested or very active token pair, they can pay more. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to
So
affect people on Magic Eden.
yeah, and one of the reasons that my kid uses it and his friends use it is because they're able to, you know, there's no loss of quote unquote value. If they have a mint that's unsuccessful, it cost them a fraction of a cent. They don't care. If it goes through and they want to trade it with their friends back and forth 100 times, there's, it's micros of a cents. And so they really kind of appreciate the fact that they're not, when you think of teenagers and you think of like, they make $20 a week, maybe their allowance or what they have, like, they're very frugal in most cases about this, especially when it relates to a volatile asset like crypto or NFTs. They take it very seriously. So, how as you guys continue to evolve, because you're not EVM compatible, you guys do your own things. And so my question as I ask this, we've deployed our crystal whales on Ethereum, Polygon, as well as Solana. And the thing that surprised us the most about the Solana deployment is how integrated the concept of NFTs are. The ability to kind of have so many features, instead of having to do an ERC 721 or 1155 contract, like you guys have built as many tools and constantly evolving tools right into the chain. What was the reason for that? And does it continue to evolve that way?
Totally. So when, I mean, it's sort of funny, certainly when Toly first conceived of Solana, I think he very much had DeFi as sort of the primary use case in mind. But he knew that like you also don't know what the future holds, so you want to design to maximize flexibility. And so that's informed a lot of the design decisions. And then when we saw that NFTs were really becoming this powerful thing, we're like, okay, how do we use the flexibility that we have to build a tool that's really valuable? So in the early days, the Solana core team helped set up some of the way that NFTs are constructed on Solana. But at this point, it's actually mostly not us. It's a lot of it's this organization called Metaplex that
Yep.
defines the Metaplex standard. That's sort of the dominant NFT standard. They're doing a bunch of stuff that's coming to make NFTs not only sort of more flexible, but also like orders of magnitude cheaper. And so yeah, so basically, I guess the short answer to your question is, chain's flexible. We saw NFTs becoming a huge thing. We're like, okay, let's build some initial set of tooling so that people can sort of experiment on Solana, and then I don't know, Degen Ape Academy happened, and we were off to the races.
Hey, listen, I owned one of those for a long time until I exited for about I think it was about 150 Sol when Sol was around $200. I said goodbye. It's been fun. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that ride there, and we'll pick up another one here probably this week. It's probably the time to buy one to go pick that one up again.
Totally. I mean, I don't like shilling projects. It's funny, people ask me all the time about like, hey, like what's the NFT alpha on Solana, and I sadly have to respond like, dude, I have no idea. I simply don't have enough time in the day to keep up with the speed of the NFT market on Solana. Degen Ape certainly has a soft spot in my heart because I'd argue they were sort of the thing that really lit the match on Solana NFTs. Also, the story behind that launch was pretty epic, but
let's hear it.
Unfortunately, I don't know if I could share.
Okay.
Yeah, because
I tried. I really did. So you do quite a bit of social media scanning. You're doing a lot of Discord and Twitter, as you said. What's as we kind of start bringing this thing towards a close here right now, what's the biggest point of FUD that you'd like to go ahead and address or clarify that you're seeing through the Twitter feeds? I see so many people saying, "Oh, Solana's going to zero now that Sam's out." And what are you seeing that you've been like, "No, this is not true"?
Yeah, I think the specific piece of FUD, the unstaking thing we talked about earlier, that one's just very straightforward. The Solana's going to zero thing, look, I have no idea what happens in the markets generally or what the price of Sol token is going to do, whatever. The one thing that is just extremely apparent to me is, even though I wasn't there, the amount of energy and cool shit that was being built by people in the Solana ecosystem, just from what I saw at Breakpoint in Lisbon, it was incredible. And so, right, that happened this weekend. And that hasn't fundamentally changed since then, since the FTX situation transpired. So I was super excited about all of that. The FTX situation is like certainly a tsunami that the industry is going to have to survive. I'm sure it will. I'm sure the Solana ecosystem will survive. And coming out of it on the other end, like, I actually think that it's sort of useful for the ecosystem. I certainly didn't wish it happened this way, but this meme that Solana is a Sam coin probably gets disabused, and then maybe the ownership of the token gets more diffuse. That's perhaps good. So I'm just incredibly excited about the future still. Maybe weird to say in a time like this, but there's gonna be some pain, but we're not going anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's a number of things that are always happening in any asset class. Web3 moves, about 4.5 times faster than the speed of the traditional stock market. And your rate of development has been incredibly fast. I mean, to be clear, every time, as we were developing on the Solana chain for yWhales, we would pause. We'd go, oh, we're not ready to launch. Let's do that next month. And we have to go upgrade the code because you guys were iteratively changing and upgrading so much. And, we could launch with the old version, but we're like, no, these new features are great. And I love hearing that yes, the foundation is there. No, the foundation is not 100% required going forward, that you guys have the ability for that to unplug and go away, but more so to hear that you do have a lot of large outside teams that are very vested in the development of this chain, which is what we want. My last question, and to pivot over to this, is let's talk about the nodes. You guys have a slightly different way of dealing with this. Over on Ethereum, everyone in the planet can run a node, and it's fine, and they all kind of have a percentage chance of winning a mining reward to a certain extent. But if you wouldn't mind kind of talking through what that node ecosystem looks like, and if there's any changes coming down the pipe in the near future.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's funny, like for Ethereum, it depends on the type of client you run, But if you want to actually run like a proper validator that's sort of contributing to the network, there's technically a 32 ETH limit, which is sort of not a significant amount of money. So, anyways, my point's not that that system is bad. It's just that people have this default notion that like Ethereum is like extremely accessible, and that's not not exactly true. So, anyways, with respect to Solana, yeah. So I think now actually we can check this live.
Oh, here we go. You can screen share. You're welcome to.
No, I'm just trying to pull up one number, which is just how many nodes are live now, which right now looks like 1,851. And I guess it depends on how you count it. If it's like 3,000 roughly, or a little over 3,000 if you count RPC nodes, but if you look at actually voting nodes, it's something like 1,800, which is awesome. If you look at, so this is something we think a lot about, which is that decentralization for the network means not only more nodes, but also more distribution of stake across those nodes. And so this is actually something we actively work to encourage. So the foundation has a grants program. One of the things that we want to write grants for are people who are building infrastructure that either helps the network get more nodes or helps decentralize the stake across those nodes. So something super important to us. Seeing like the line of how many validators are active in the network has been awesome, because it's like up only, despite bear market, whatever. And the stake has also been getting more distributed across those nodes. So what's been awesome to see is there's this number, it's called the Nakamoto coefficient, I think was the original terminology. You can also, it's called like sort of the super minority number for proof of stake networks, which is sort of how many nodes does it take to get to roughly 33% of the stake weight, or sort of total stake amount, because that's sort of a material threshold at which point you can start messing with a network. So that number for Solana is like 30 something, last I checked.
Okay.
Given this sort of recent market turmoil, maybe that changed a little bit, but 30 something, maybe 32 or something like that, which is awesome. It's like basically it's the highest coefficient for any proof of stake network, right? Ethereum included. I think the issue for Ethereum is that there's a ton of staked ETH on like Kraken, Coinbase. And so that brings down Ethereum's Nakamoto coefficient quite a bit. And then if you look at other proof of stake networks, also not as high. So something we're really proud about the network. So anyways, I don't know if I exactly answered the question about nodes, I think, but that's how we think about it.
Yeah, I think that's fabulous. And by the way, I saw that Google is now offering Solana validator hosting.
Yep, exactly.
Which is, again, exactly what you want. At the end of the day, proof of stake is proof of stake. You want the highest efficiency and the most ecologically friendly servers running, and you can do that internally. But we got rid of this years ago, and I think it's sometimes easier to trust that Google is going to be a little bit better on finding the best equipment, the best electricity, ecological standards, and then using it from that perspective. So I think it's great to see that the big guys are recognizing what you guys are doing.
Yeah, it was super awesome to see the Google. I mean, it's interesting actually. There's sort of this trade-off where I think if you want to run a node and do it as cost efficiently as possible, you're actually better off sort of setting up your own machine in a data center than doing it through Google. But it sort of depends, right? If you want to be a node, but you don't necessarily want or have the capabilities to do all the work, maybe that's an option for you. So it's great to have the full suite of options, and then people can decide, like, do I want to use a managed service that's run by Google? Do I want to do my own thing? I think having that choice for people is great.
Fabulous. Kuleen, as we get ready to bring this to close, my last question, this is entirely just on you. What's your thoughts on the overall where Web3 is going, or any just concept that you would like our audience to think about? Doesn't have to be about Solana, but just overall Web3 development, innovation, or kind of entrepreneurialism around Web3. Any deep thoughts?
Any deep thoughts? Yeah, I guess I'll say a couple of things. One is like, this is kind of a weird thing to say, but maybe as a mental model that'll be useful to people. The way I always like to think about blockchains is replace the word blockchain with the word slow database. So every time you read the word blockchain, because that's what blockchain is. Blockchains are slow databases, but they're slow databases with some nice properties. They're decentralized, or at least they ought to be decentralized. And I think most powerfully, they're composable. There are these open things, people can build on them, and those things can easily talk to each other. So, whenever you think about building stuff in crypto, I think that one of the important questions to ask yourself is like, okay, why does this benefit from being on a slow open database? And if you have a good answer to that question, great. That's something that belongs in crypto land. Anyway, so that's one point of philosophy that maybe I wanted to bring up. The other one is, I think, 2022 has been a pretty rough year for the markets. But in some ways, there was a lot of excess in the system that needed to get culled. This has been a pretty maybe painful way of getting that excess out, but I actually think it's quite healthy for the ecosystem long term, and that the people who stick around like are in it for the right reasons and really trying to build valuable stuff for everyone. And so I'm pretty optimistic about the future. I do think it's going to be a long journey, because I think for crypto to really reach broad mainstream adoption, it's like the applications need to get there, but people also need to get comfortable with self-custody, which is almost like a cultural question. So it's going to be a long journey. It's going to be an exciting one. I certainly hope it's going to be a little less exciting than 2022 was in the long term. But yeah.
Yeah, I
Can't wait to see it
completely
play out.
agree with you. From a venture capital standpoint, you kind of want to see some of these brush fires. It's painful, but you want to see the strong team survive. And if you have a weak team with a weak product, in a bull market, it's relatively easy to get funding. In a bear and in a winter, it becomes much more difficult. And sometimes you want to have those teams reallocate to the stronger projects. To the number of people that I met in the last 2 years that are like, hey, I'm going to launch a company and we're going to make NFTs for other people. Okay. Except we've kind of built some no code things that do that now. So what's your value to bring in? Well, I'm an NFT expert. Okay, well, I don't know
Right.
what that means, but I wish you the best of luck in your career endeavors of trading JPEGs. So I really am excited to see, a lot of these companies growing, expanding, shifting, changing, because the rate of innovation that I'm seeing today is actually much stronger than it was a year ago. Because people aren't as worried about where the coin prices are. They're not worried about rushing to market. They're worried about delivering a good product. And I want to, really thank you for taking the time today. I know exactly how stressed your team most likely is, because you're dealing with some external factors that have a very hefty, hit to a lot of the team and the metrics, and do affect a lot of the projects that are on your chain as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you for having me on. It's been great. Hopefully, a useful one for the users or for the listeners. And yeah, for me, a lot of crypto is about changing hearts and mind almost one by one. And so I try to do that as I can. And yeah, after this, I'm going right back to sort of supporting the ecosystem as best we can through
Well,
quite the
thank you
week
so
it's been.
much. Perfect.
Absolutely.
yWhales, this is Kuleen with the Solana Foundation. Kuleen, thank you so much for swinging by, and don't go anywhere, but we will catch up with you guys later. yWhales, see you next time.